Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. Today is going to be POOPtacular. Amy, I am very excited. I'm not going to introduce you this time. So that's going to be the mix-up for this week. I'm going to run out of creative ideas. This is Amy Baumgartzian, and no, I'm kidding. Amy Baumkamp, R to the D to the max. Guys, we are talking a lot about poop today, so if you are like at all squeamish, this is not your episode, potentially. Just be aware. But today, we are going to talk about Fecal Microbial Transplant, FMT. And I'm super pumped that I can talk to somebody who has done it. So
yes.
I know we talked about it a little bit in the first episode, but pretty much I'm going to hand the reins off to you for this episode. And I'm just going to be like soaking it all in, Amy. So tell me all the things. Let's start with recapping a little bit about your experience. And do you get this question a lot? Like, do a lot of people ask you about FMT and like if it's a good option for them? And
yeah,
all the things.
I mean, I feel like from an FMT standpoint, it's something I've written about. I have 2 articles on my blog about it, and it's usually probably the most reached out about topic. People are like, where are you now? It's been 4 or 5 years since you wrote this article. Like, where are you now? Are you still good? Like, asking me all these update questions.
Yeah.
So I get that all the time. Like I said, it's probably the most reached out about article I've written.
It's your claim to fame right now.
Maybe my poop transplant is my claim to fame. But I think, FMT is such an interesting topic because I feel like, unfortunately, in like the SIBO and the IBS space, there's a lot of desperation. Like, I feel like I was in a desperation type state when I went and got FMT, where it's like, I've tried all these things, nothing's moving the needle.
Yeah.
I think FMT is like my only option at this point. Like, I feel like it's kind of viewed in that sense. I don't know if you've ever gotten that with any clients that have asked you.
Like the Hail Mary.
Right. Like, oh, well, there's always FMT. It's kind of like, something in the tool belt for people that they consider. And I've definitely seen some people other than me get FMT, who I've worked with. I don't think anyone that I've worked with has gotten FMT during the time I've worked with them. Mm-hmm. Not that I remember, but I know some have gotten it either before or have wanted to prepare for FMT working with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's such a weird topic because you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get FMT in general for something like IBS or SIBO, because it's not available here in the States for those conditions. And I just think everyone's really curious about it. It has such a high efficacy rate for C. diff that I think it's very natural for it to be used or experimented with other conditions GI-wise. And so, I think when I was going through FMT and like kind of before I did it, it was like a Hail Mary from my standpoint.
Yeah.
Looking back, I think there was a lot of things I hadn't tried.
Yeah.
Prior to getting it. So
do you think you weren't aware of the things you hadn't tried, or did you have resistance to some of the things?
That's a really good question. I feel like, I was a little bit more, like I had branched out from the restrictive diet side of things, but I don't think I necessarily was super intentional about trying things like prebiotics or really kind of ramping up different varieties of things. Like, I think there was a lot I could have still done, like, that was very microbial building compared to what I did prior. I mean, I had sort of branched out of the restrictive side of things. I also think I had kind of a lot of other things going on as well. Like, I think I still had some hormonal things at play. I think I still had some brain-gut axis stuff at play. Like, there was still a lot at play that maybe I hadn't totally put all the pieces together yet.
Yeah.
So I think before I went, I was pretty desperate. And I think usually when people are asking about it, it's sort of viewed as this desperate,
Yeah.
a desperate Hail Mary type strategy.
Yeah.
And probably for good reason, because it is costly.
Well, you have to travel out of the country.
Right.
And some people get weirded out the thought of putting another person's poop up their butt. Because, to clarify, this should have been topic number 1. What is FMT and how is it done? We're not talking about taking probiotics or even ingesting a pill full of other people's poop. We're talking about like up the butthole, somebody else's poop going in your pooper. So to be clear, that's what we're talking about here. That's how you acquire the new microbes that are being transplanted into your body. Colon to colon.
Yep. Poop in the pooper.
The ultimate sharing experience, really.
Yes.
So now that's good. You know, some people, I mean, honestly, I remember, I don't know if I told you this, we were visiting my in-laws. This was 2 summers ago, and they're like normal people. I don't know, like they're just normal, like middle-class American people. And then their son married this weird lady who like is into poop and nutrition and stuff.
Ooh.
And I remember somehow we got on the topic of FMT. Oh, because Mike's grandmother had C. diff. And they were treating it with antibiotics for like the 3rd time in a row. And I was like, well, what about FMT? And I Googled it. And I was like, okay, there's a place in Rochester, an hour away. You could drive her to Rochester. And I remember Mike's dad literally said he would rather die than get somebody else's poop put up his butt.
Oh, and gosh.
But Mike and I both were like, Paul, come on. I'm like, no, you're joking. You would not literally rather die. And he was like, yes, Mike, I would rather die. And we're like, why? What's a little poop, mano y mano?
Right,
come on.
Right,
like,
right.
I'm sorry, if the option is death or like, I don't like, I'll let you do whatever as long as you keep me alive. Like,
right.
Anyway,
exactly.
But some people get really weirded out by the idea of A, putting anything up their butt, but B, putting somebody else's fecal material up their butt. So with the cost and the travel and the squeamish factor, I can see why it becomes a last-ditch resort for people, because those 3 things do make it kind of unappealing and unobtainable for many people.
Yeah, and I would say, too, an interesting, like, when people try to do their own, like, DIY fecal transplant, like, to me, that seems just very messy and just kind of, dicey for a number of reasons. Like, if you do it, like, where I went to the Tame Out Clinic, which they've been doing FMTs for, like, I think it was, like, 20 years, something like that. And they have, like, super poop donors where they literally will have them eat 100 different foods a month. Like, they will monitor that, look at, like, how their bacteria is affected, and they're really, like, good about getting great donors. And they have perfected the process of how you extract poop, which, like, if you're trying to do it on your own, that whole process gets messed up because the bacteria is exposed to the air. So, like, what bacteria is in your transplant is going to totally change. Whereas how they extract it, they sort of do it to protect the microbes that are going to be exposed to the air. You have a question?
Yes, I'm raising my hand. Pray tell, how do they extract it then? Because I am picturing a poop vacuum. I'm picturing that there's like an apparatus that goes up to your butt cheeks and sucks it out in a vacuum, in a void. Right. And then the poop is kept in a vacuum. Please, God, tell me there's a poop vacuum that literally sucks it out of the butt. Because that would be so perfect.
Honest to God, I didn't ask too many questions, but maybe I can shoot them an email.
You missed this opportunity.
I missed the opportunity to figure out if it was a poop vacuum or what. But I know that they really, like, listening to the head of that clinic talk, that's his main issue with people doing, like, DIY. And I would even assume, like, some practitioners that are kind of experimenting with FMT, if they don't necessarily know the ins and outs, they might not be extracting the full microbiome. Because of just how they're getting their poop samples. But
side note, if they don't already do this, this is our latest business endeavor. Okay. We can open up an FMT clinic And we will patent the poop extractor vacuum
Ooh.
apparatus where
Wow.
the bacteria aren't exposed to oxygen because we're going to suck it out in a vacuum and then keep it in a vacuum chamber. So, boom, moneymaker.
Wowie, this is a novel idea. We definitely need to.
So, maybe you shouldn't reach out to them. Maybe you're like compromising our intellectual property, and we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, we probably do.
Anyway,
we probably
continue.
Need to keep this on the DL. But yeah,
as we say it on a podcast, you mean? Like, we're totally keeping it on the DL.
Yes, exactly.
Bum's the word, guys. Bum's the word.
And so, again, a lot of like, you will get on some of these forums. Like, I think I was on an FMT forum, and it was literally like, oh, I had my friend, like, drop off their stool, like, put it in a blender. Yeah. Like, and again, like, I get it. Like, people are super desperate, and they're just like, I'm going to do this on my own. I can't, like, go out of the country. But I'd be really careful in those situations. I think if you're going to do FMT, I'd really try to, like, go to the best of the, like, I don't know. I sort of went the direction of let's make sure that people sort of know the processes of what they're doing and that sort of thing. But,
you want to make sure the donor material is good. That's the big thing. Right. Because, like, I had a patient probably 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half, and we did stool testing, and, I mean, she had nothing. I mean, like, Akkermansia, gone. Fecalibacterium, gone. Bifido, I think, might have been gone. Like, a lot of her good bacteria were so compromised or gone that we had the conversation of, like, you know, and she'd been very, very sick for decades. And that came up, like, you know, this might be something that you consider down the road. And, you know, we talked about, like, the realisticness of doing it, like, DIY. And I was telling her, I was like, if you were to pursue DIY, which I'm not necessarily advocating, if you were to pursue that, I mean, I think bare minimum, I would ask, like, a gajillion questions. Ask people, like, do you have constipation, diarrhea, bloating, reflux, indigestion? Like, that person that you're getting donor material from should have no GI symptoms and no autoimmunity, in my opinion. And also do at least 2, if not 3 or 4 different stool tests on that person, because you don't want that person to have, like, a parasite or mad candida overgrowth or, like, a pathogen, and then you miss it because you either didn't screen them at all or you didn't screen them appropriately. Like, they could be carrying around something real weird and you would never know unless you do multiple tests. So, like, if you are going to do DIY, I mean, if it was me, I would probably do a minimum of 3 different stool tests and do them twice on that same individual. So 6 total. Right. If it was me, like, before I felt comfortable sourcing my own donor material, I think that that's probably what it would come down to. Right. So it's almost, it ends up being almost more cost effective to go to a place that does it because you don't have to pay for, like, thousands of dollars worth of stool testing to screen the donor. You could just go to the Bahamas.
No, and I think it's interesting, too, to, like, compare the costs of it. Because even if you do it here in the States, like, I think, you know, if it's not covered by insurance, it's like $5,000 for one procedure. Or at least that's what I read when I was kind of looking into FMT. Like, for C. diff, for a GI doc or whatever, to do this really quick, like, not really super, I mean, somewhat invasive, but not like they're doing even a colonoscopy on you. It's pretty quick and easy. But, like, one donation versus if you go to, like, the UK to the T-Mount clinic, back when I was doing it, I think it was like $5,000 for a 2-week, like, 10 FMT, like 10 different donors. If you like a particular donor too, you can get more of that donor when you're there. Like, if you're like, oh, that felt really good.
Okay, I was going to say, like, based off symptoms?
Right. So, like, and sometimes, like, again, it's so early to tell. Like, if you go there, they'll say some people, you know, are really, like, respond really right away. Like, they have good responses relatively quickly. And then other people, you know, it's like 3 months later and they've sort of been building up the microbes and the communities are more stable, that they start to get a lot more benefits. So, but I do think, cost-wise, it's interesting because I actually think it's somewhat more cost-effective to do, like, going to the UK, but you have the travel costs and things, too, to weigh. But I also think here in the States as well, a lot of times if you do go to, like, a GI doc or conventional group, they're going to use, like, some family member, typically. Because, I mean, most people I feel like aren't super comfortable going to, like, a friend. Some people might. I don't know if I would necessarily.
I would give you my poop, Amy.
Oh,
all day, every day. Yeah.
Cool. That's good to know.
Side note, remind me to tell you my poop in a cooler story, but I feel like I don't want to derail you too much, but just for what it's worth, remind me in a minute.
Okay, I will remind you. But yeah, so, I mean, if you think about someone in your environment, they could still have different microbes than you, but a lot of times they might be eating the same things. Like if it's your husband or your spouse or like someone in your relative circle that's living in your environment, they might be exposed to a lot of the same things you are. They could still have a much healthier microbiome for other reasons, but I do think typically, like, you're not necessarily getting the best of the best stool from your family members, unless, again, you have some just amazing family members that have amazing poop. But
my husband has bifido levels, like, off the freaking charts. I kind of want a piece of that in a way.
Yeah.
But, like, I would traumatize him if I asked him for his poop. But, like, I mean, I'm talking, like, 7% bifido. It was amazing.
Oh my gosh.
I'm very jealous. Meanwhile, mine is like 0.00 something. I'm like, oh crap. But anyway, I only want his bifido, if nothing else. I want to like take some of that. Yeah,
but again, I think it's, to me, if you were going to do FMT, I would go to like a really, like a reputable clinic that's doing this, has been doing it for a number of years, has sort of got the procedure down pat.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but I went to the Bahamas branch, which was interesting. So, which is just funny. Like, I'm going to go, all my friends, I'm like, I'm getting my poop. Like, they all knew I was going to the Bahamas.
Poopcation.
Yeah, for sure. It was like a medical vacation. My mom went with me. And I think, people ask me because their main clinics in the UK, just time of year and timing wise, really, I could only get into the Bahamas branch. And it was just like nice to go there. It's sunny, those sorts of things. In the winter, it was in December. Right. So, but the UK one is probably cheaper. Like if cost is more of a factor, just to get there, I think the cost of getting there might be slightly more expensive because it's international. But if you were ever considering it, I would kind of weigh the cost. The Bahamas, like, the food is so expensive too because they like ship it in. So everything, like, an apple's like $6, so like it was wild there, the food. But I think overall it's probably cheaper if you wanted to have it done to go to the UK branch. But the tame out in the Bahamas was great. So if you did just want to like do a vacation in a flyby poop transplant, you could do it. And it was super easy. I mean, I think again, like the squeamishness is definitely a factor. You're like, oh, what's this gonna be? But you would just go to the clinic every weekday, and they had like these little vials, again with the FMT in it. They basically extract the bacteria out, is how it was described to me. So it's not necessarily the waste from the person. Like they have a way to extract the bacteria.
Interesting.
So they just like, it's literally a syringe, kind of like an enema. Like it's literally a syringe. They just stick a little tube like syringe it in you. And then you basically they'd take it out and you'd kind of sit in different positions to help it move to different parts of your body. So I'm trying to remember. I think at first I'm kind of laying back to have it go down the colon. And then they sit you on your side.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes down the other way, and then they sit you up, and you do each one for maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. And then you left, and you were kind of like...
And were you like under any sort of anesthesia? Or
No.
Okay. Huh.
No. It was super, like, easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I had this perception that it would be like general anesthesia.
No, it was like, it was very, very easy. It wasn't painful at all. It was just, and it was the same nurse each time. So you kind of like got to know the nurses, and they're kind of the affiliate branch. So they get trained by the Tameout. And so they have all the Tameout like education. So they kind of come in, give you education on like, oh, you should be eating diverse foods and things like that to help with the microbiome. They would give you like charts to fill out of how many different foods you were eating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a really good experience. I thought they did a really good job where I went.
And the $1 million question, and probably why you get a lot of emails about this, is do you feel like it helped you? And do you think that has stuck with you now years down the road?
Yeah, I think, again, from my standpoint, I would say going there really helped kick off my journey in a positive way. Like, it helped get me out of a rut. I would say I probably improved 50 to 60% with the FMT.
Yeah.
Symptom-wise, kind of energy-wise, it didn't solve all my problems. I think, what I probably thought then, and I think a lot of people think now, is like, oh, if I just like correct the gut, all the problems will go away.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it can be the other way around, where it's like you have to address these other pieces of the puzzle in order to get gut function operating optimally.
Yeah.
So, I definitely think it was positive. I think that it's had positive benefits long term. Do I think it's this like a total miracle cure? No. And I think, again, it also probably depends on, how much work was done leading up to the FMT, and where someone's kind of coming from. Because, like, if someone's coming and getting the FMT, kind of like me, where my adrenals were fried, my thyroid was still a mess, my liver enzymes were elevated at that time, and they actually did fall. Like, I had blood work showing them falling after the FMT. So there was just a lot going on still in different systems that I think once when I got back, it was like, okay, this sort of helped with some imbalances that were going on, but I still have these other issues that are still probably affecting digestion somewhat. Yeah. In other aspects of my health. So from my standpoint, again, I felt like it was very helpful for me. Was it something that totally turned things around, like, completely? No. But, and I would say, too, I've seen mixed results from other people that have gotten it. Some people didn't really get much benefit at all, which, I mean, would be a big letdown, I feel like, if you, like, traveled to another country. And then other people I see, like, kind of like me, where it was really beneficial for them. So it can be one of those things where I think is a little bit hit or miss depending on kind of where you're at when you go. A lot of the people that I've talked to that have done it have been in pretty bad shape. So kind of pretty severe when they're going to get the FMT. But yeah, I mean, again, from my standpoint, you still need to address kind of root causal areas that could be driving the dysbiosis. Yeah. And you probably have to be able to have a broad diet so that once you do get FMT, you can actually feed the microbes.
And that's huge, because there's no point introducing new microbes if you don't intend to feed them right away.
Right.
So it's like this kind of shitty, pun intended, catch-22 of like, you might be in a position where your IBS or SIBO is really bad, or your IBD is really bad, and you feel like, oh, if I could just get the new microbes, then I'll be good, and then I will be able to eat more foods. Right. But you do need to be really mindful of that. Otherwise, it's just a really expensive temporary poop transplant. You
Right.
want to give the bacteria a reason to shack up and live in your system for the long haul.
Right. And I thought what was interesting, because in all like the educational materials they give you, they will say like, okay, you might not want to go from like 0 to 100.
Yeah.
If you're coming from a restrictive diet. They do kind of help. The Tame Out was really good about like providing some education on easing into it, but they do have you take like Bimuno like after like every morning.
Yeah.
After you get your FMT.
Yeah.
So like they are sort of having prebiotics as part of the approach.
Good.
From out the gate. So again, I think that there's like, if you're gonna do FMT, I'd have some support on like first how to prepare and make sure you're in a good place for FMT. Yeah. And then secondly, you want to make sure you're doing things that are going to really foster the microbes that you're getting. One thing too that you had mentioned about, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, some of these like IBD conditions. Yeah. So I did hear a podcast that the microbiologist from Tame Out was talking about, like, for IBS, he has a lot higher success rate than for things. Yeah.
Rather than IBD?
Than for things like IBD. He said IBD is a little bit tricky, but he said with IBD, he can get really good results. The timing matters. So like he doesn't want to give anyone FMT if they're flared. So it makes it trickier. So like someone, might take off 2 weeks of work to do this treatment. Yeah. And then he's like, no, like we actually can't do this if you're flared up. It'll create more inflammation. Huh. So what he said, if you have those conditions, is he really wants to kind of try to do some things to control the inflammations and get you out of a flare. But once you're not in a flare, usually people do well with FMT, but it takes more treatments, like more ongoing treatments, to get relief than something like an IBS or like dysbiosis without that like really inflammatory process underneath it.
And that makes sense, because I think like IBD for Crohn's and colitis both, we know they're autoimmune. So obviously like there's a microbial piece of that. Like autoimmune people are people whose immune systems have been struggling with something or jacked up for some reason. And oftentimes that's microbial. But it's like the inflammation itself can kind of snowball away from you and contribute to poor motility, poor digestive juices, immune function in the gut. So it makes sense that you would have to control that inflammation to some degree. And then you can be a good recipient for the FMT. But that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting because like the whole process with the Bahamas, I had 2 calls with them. One was with like a nurse just to kind of give me general information, like a consult, like an initial consult over the phone. But then I spoke to the doctor. The doctor wants to look at labs, like was looking at my labs, like poop tests and things like that to see if I was a good recipient. Like again, I was someone that they felt was a good like candidate because the timing didn't matter as much to me because I didn't have IBD type situation going on. And the doctor too was like the most Bahama doctor you could ever like imagine, was saying like, yeah, man, like literally the most like islandy doctor you could ever think of was the doctor for this FMT. And he wasn't around very much. He like came the first day, like checked me in, made sure everything was okay, and then kind of checked me out. So really I didn't see him much. It was mainly like the nurse and the nurse's aides that we were kind of doing this every day. But yeah, if you ever go to the Bahamas and get FMT, you will see a very Bahama-y doctor, or at least if he's still there. I can't remember what his name was.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Adds to the experience.
It does. It does. It adds to the island poop transplant experience.
Poopcation.
Right.
I think we should coin the term poopcation. When we host getaways or retreats someday when
Mhm.
COVID is not around, we should call them poopcations.
We should. We
It
definitely
should be like,
should.
we'll have a brochure. We'll have a website, poopcation.com. It'll be awesome.
We should. But yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else too, like about the actual FMT. Like I said, it was super easy. Like I know we were talking before we got on that you're doing your coffee enema experiment.
Yes.
And coffee enemas, like to me, have always been like, I don't know, like I've debated on trying them. But yeah,
for shits and giggles.
right. But you were like, oh, it's actually like pretty simple. Like it's easier than I thought. I feel like the FMT that I did was super simple. It took them 2 seconds to do, and then I just had to move in different positions for 15 minutes, and then I got up and left.
Not a bad gig.
Yeah, so it was a really interesting experience. I feel like for me, I definitely noticed change. Like while you're doing it, it's hard to describe. Like you can feel things kind of changing. I feel like, you know, I really noticed more effects the longer that I had the microbes, which the tame out sort of says it takes like 3 to 6 months to really, if you're feeding the microbes and taking care of them, for them to really like create a community and like, you know, for them to establish space in your microbiome. So it was overall, I think, a very good experience for me. And I know, like, we have volleyed around, like, people that come to us that are like, oh, should I do FMT? Like, there is, like, a little bit of, like, oh, like, what I typically tell people is, like, let's review, like, the things that you've tried and what you haven't. And, like, is this really something that makes sense? Most of the time, there's some areas that I would say they need to work on first. Yeah. That's why I've never really, again, maybe there was one or two clients that we seriously discussed FMT. But usually when we think we've tried everything, like that mindset, I've tried everything. It just, you might have tried a lot of stuff. It just wasn't necessarily the right combination or the right strategies that were going to help in your particular situation.
Yeah. Well, I find, too, like, the human brain is kind of a funny contraption because we do sometimes, like, I've tried everything. Or, like, I just spoke with a woman this morning. Lovely phone call, lovely conversation. But she said, we've done all the tests imaginable on her daughter. And then we got to talking about what those tests were. Not all the tests imaginable.
Yeah.
I mean, like, they've done a fair amount.
A bunch of tests.
Well, it's like, you know, it was like 2 or 3 different stool tests and some blood work and like a mold test. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't deem that all the tests.
Yeah.
Like, but, you know, from her standpoint, like, she mentioned she's a single mom. Like, you know, that would be costly. Like, it could feel like you've done all the things or that you've gotten all the tests. But oftentimes that's not necessarily accurate. Or, like, it makes me think of when my 5-year-old tells us, for example, if I tell her that, no, you can't have chocolate right now, her automatic response in this situation is, we never get to have treats. Never. Yeah. And I'm like, never? Never. And I'm like, well, what about last weekend? And it's like the human brain just likes to go to that, like, I've tried everything or never. And it's like, all right, slow down.
Yeah.
Think with the other part of your brain.
Yeah, I think we have a negativity bias. So, like, you know, you've spent money on labs and spent money on supplements and, you know. And
if it hasn't worked and you're frustrated.
Right. So I get it. I get it completely. I mean, I was probably there when I went to do FMT. Looking back, had I tried all the things? No. But typically, you know, when I have someone that's really interested in FMT, I'm like, let's just like try some things and see if let's try some things. I'm going to review your case, like what's jumping out at me as being factors. What can we address that you haven't tried? Like really kind of looking at your case again. Most of the time there's some things that are pretty obvious that need to be worked on, but might have just been missed. So I think, again, like, I'm typically someone that's like, oh, let's make sure to try most other things first, especially if there's like a smaller budget, because again, FMT is expensive, and again, like I said, I've seen sort of mixed results. Some people feel amazing, some people don't. So it's like there is a risk that it might not end up being this like amazing solution for you. But even reviewing someone's case too, and say like, oh, like your adrenals seem like they're looking okay, like your thyroid looks, like, understanding the other underlying factors might help determine if someone is even a good fit for FMT at that particular moment. Yeah,
I think that's a reasonable approach. Look through, kind of make sure that you've done all the other things, or as many of the other things. And like what I alluded to at the beginning with you, I asked, like, do you think it was that you were not aware of some of the things, or that you weren't willing? So, like, you know, there's you know, sometimes, honestly, like, people are just not open-minded to having the stress conversation.
Right.
Or they're not willing to make some tough decisions in their life to minimize stress. And it's like, you know, would you rather, would you rather, like, talk to your spouse about getting couples therapy and repairing your marriage because your shitty marriage is stressing you out on a day-to-day basis? Or would you rather spend $5,000 getting poop put up your butt? Like, sometimes it'll feel like you've done all the things, but if you're not, you know, if you're particularly resistant to something, it's, you know, it can be kind of tough. But yeah, I think just trying to figure out, like, have you really tried most of the other options, like, genuinely tried them, and, you know, are you going to be a good host for these microbes? Because from their perspective too, like, the clinic, I'm sure that they don't want people out there in the world who are saying, oh, FMT didn't work, because then that'll be bad for business. But then also, it's almost like they have to be responsible for the microbes, because it's kind of like if you worked at an animal shelter and you were trying to find a home for this homeless dog.
Right.
It's like, if somebody comes in and they are clearly not going to be a good host, and they're clearly like a drug dealer, crack addict, dog eater person, I don't know, like all the worst things.
Yeah.
Like, if there's clearly somebody who's not going to be a good fit, like, it's that person's duty to say, no, I'm not going to let you adopt this dog. And it's kind of like with FMT, you're kind of adopting your microbes.
Yeah.
And you're, like, applying to see if you're going to be a good host for those microbes. And if they don't think you're going to be a good fit, it's their duty on multiple levels to tell you, you know what? No, I don't think you're the right host. We're gonna put our microbes in somebody else's butt. So it's kind of food for thought.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up too, so when I was there, again, I was always asking the nurses, like, questions, and they couldn't, like, tell me specifically who were the other people getting FMT. There was a woman who I believe was a lawyer who was getting FMT that we talked to a lot, who was there, and she was down to like 3 foods. But I'm like, I hope she's and she had been able to increase. I remember now, it's all coming back. It's all flowing back to me now. She was able to incorporate salad in by the end of her trip.
Okay. Yeah.
So she was kind of incorporating some new foods in. But I was always asking the nurses, like, who are, like, the people that you typically, like, who is coming to get FMT? Is it, like, IBS people? Like, what does that look like? Is it mainly C. diff? And the crazy thing is, she said most, like, a big majority of their clients that they get to do FMT are autism kids. Like, they get a lot of autistic kids that are coming to get FMT, which I found was really interesting, because that was, like, not on my radar, mainly because I was in the IBS SIBO space. Obviously, again, like, there's some connections that are being made between the microbiome and autism, which is really fascinating. But it was interesting talking to her, because I just would not have expected that. But she's like, we get tons of kids, like a lot of kids. And I was like asking her, you know, like, what kind of results do you get with autism kids. And she said a lot of them like have more severe, like nonverbal type autism. And she's like, like it's slow. It's not like they get FMT and they're just like talking and bouncing, like, like,
hi, Shirley.
Right. But she said it's kind of amazing. Like usually by the end of their work, like they might be someone that never makes eye contact and the kid now is making eye contact and like being more engaged. So it was interesting talking to her about that too, like some of the other clientele that's coming in from a microbiome standpoint.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know, like, I don't really work ever with autism, but I know when I lived in Arizona, I became aware that there's a research group at Arizona State University where they're looking at, I just have some vague recollection that they were looking at like the microbiome in autistic kids. And it was really neat stuff. Yeah, I thought, I haven't dug too much into that research, again, besides basic stuff. I remember reading or hearing a podcast, I think, where there was a researcher talking about, like, maybe it being a high, I can't remember if it was propionate, like one of the short-chain fatty acids. They were kind of linking to more autism spectrum stuff. Huh. I don't know if that's something that's been fleshed out or what not, but I know that was kind of a theory at some point. If that's been disproven or like pushed forward anymore, I'm not aware of it. I haven't dug any deeper into that, but I know that was in the mix. Interesting. Not my clinical wheelhouse, but it's interesting nonetheless. Right. Yeah. And then you had found an article which was timely. Yes, extremely. From February, no less. So last month. Fresh off the press. I'm going to pull it up even. The ink was not dry. It was barely dry. Yeah, so let's see. Even though I'm sure we're reading it on our phones. I am. I'm completely pulling it up on my phone. Oh, yeah. So it was, for those of you listening, if you want to find this study, it's called Clinical Efficacy of Fecal Microbiota Transplantation for Patients with Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, a randomized placebo-controlled clinic study. And this was February 2021, so it's hot off the press. And I confessed to Amy when we started this recording, I was like, yeah, I sent you the article. I didn't get a chance to read it. Right. I found it though. So like, yay me for that. I know. But you read it for us. So we make a great team. So I found the thing, you read the thing. So tell me about the thing so I don't have to read the thing. Okay. Perfect. So they basically took a SIBO group. I think there was 55 people into the study. And they separated them into two groups. One had to take 16 capsules. So this wasn't like what I did where it was through the butt. This was capsule poo, which is really interesting because I feel like a lot of people with SIBO are like not wanting to take probiotics and then certainly not FMT orally. Yeah, because it's got to get through the small intestine to get to the colon. Right. And it was really fascinating too because it was like 16 capsules of poop. Like I feel like just mentally, like swallowing one capsule of poop would be a little bit hard for me mentally. But they had to swallow 16 capsules once a week for 4 weeks. So I think it was like 4 doses of this FMT. It said they took moderate to severe SIBO cases. And most of them had tried or used or was currently using a SIBO med. They kind of said SIBO med. So I'm assuming that is like, right. Or that have used them. Like I think there was 70 to 90% had used a SIBO medication before. And then it was like 60% was still using them. Do you remember how these patients were diagnosed? Was it based off of breath testing or aspirate? Breath testing, I believe. Okay. So they took these capsules or whatever. Yeah. And basically it helped the breath tests, like their breath test results. They saw a decrease in gases, essentially. On the breath test, and they also saw some symptom reduction as well. It also seemed like there was less
side effects, if I'm remembering. Like, there wasn't really any side effects.
Okay.
There was maybe one person that had like diarrhea for a day, but then it went away.
Okay.
And I think they were saying that diversity was better. I'm trying to remember. I wrote down a few
makes
things.
Sense.
Yeah, diversity of the microbiome was better post FMT compared to the control.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's just overall it's a fascinating thing because, you know, even when I was sort of discussing FMT with SIBO, there was a lot of practitioners that were like, no, like that's a terrible idea.
Too many bacteria.
Right.
You can't introduce more bacteria. Yeah,
right. The valve is going to open, spill out all, like you know.
No.
Right. So, you know.
Go home.
But I think, you know, it further proves that from a SIBO standpoint, probably an approach that's preserving and facilitating diversity is going to be really beneficial instead of the opposite. Like, we're doing the complete opposite with
antibiotics and dietary restriction and antimicrobials.
Right. So it's such I think, again, it's kind of a, like, it's good that it's indicating that, but it's kind of a bummer because it's just like there's so many people stuck in this cycle where they're clearing forever. They even kind of mentioned that in the study. Like, it's just, it works to a point. You know, someone takes rifaximin one time and they might get some benefit from it. There could be some collateral damage too, you know, from it. So it's just one of those things where it's like, there's so much fear around the diets and like SIBO, like, again, the SIBO travel we always talk about, people so scared to add variety in, so scared to try probiotics, so scared to get off antimicrobials. I don't know, it's kind of a bummer. In some ways it's so good that like some of the stuff's coming up because we can kind of see, it sort of proves some of the stuff that we're doing in some ways, but it's also like, man, like things, we've gotten it so wrong in the SIBO space that now we have to kind of pick up the pieces and make sure we're not doing any more damage.
SIBO has a long way to go.
Yeah,
like, I agree. As far as we know so much and yet so little. And the individual practitioners, particularly, oftentimes just don't know what they're freaking doing. And what drives me crazy is, at least in like the functional medicine and integrative space, people will straight up lie to you and say, oh yeah, I know how to treat SIBO. Come on in, patient, pay me all the money. And then like I see these protocols that people are doing and it's like, this person had no idea. Like, they put you on like biocidin and an olive supplement for 4 weeks and then you were supposed to be cured for, like, was there any talk about root causes or nutrition or like literally, but yeah, people are full of baloney. But I know we need to be cognizant of the time today. So may I tell you my poop in a cooler story?
Yes, poop in a cooler. Yes.
Poop in a cooler. # poop in a cooler. So one of my favorite professors in undergrad was our nutrition professor. And he was like the zaniest old guy. I think he was like 1,000 years old, if I remember correctly. And he so I went to college in Buffalo, New York, and I grew up near Ithaca. And I remember that he had mentioned, the guy was like, yeah, he went to Cornell in Ithaca, which is like very crunchy granola hippy dippy. And he went to Cornell in like the 1960s. And he would tell us stories about like, he was straight up just an Ithaca hippie. Like, he told stories like he and his would-be wife would like sit under like an apple tree eating avocados and smoking weed and like giggling the afternoon away and just like all, I'm just picturing like peace signs and rainbows flying everywhere.
Right.
And one of his stories, he had the best stories. And he mentioned when he was doing his PhD work at Cornell, they were in a lab back in like the 70s or something. And they were looking at nutrition and how it influenced the composition of fecal matter. Now, I don't remember if they were studying the microbiome. I kind of think it wasn't microbiome related. I think it was more of like what you're excreting and what you're not absorbing. Because he mentioned that in their study, they were collecting all the things. So they were collecting urine, poo, and sweat from their subjects, and they were trying to see like what was not getting absorbed, basically, like what was getting excreted and absorbed. And he was saying that one time they had one of the study members or whatever subjects had to go out of town for a business thing or something, and they were like, okay, no big deal, put your poo in a cooler and like just leave it, you know, they had to leave like really early in the morning. So they said, just put your poo in the cooler, like a little, you know, like a little igloo cooler or whatever. Put it in this cooler and then leave it out front, outside of like the graduate student's office or whatever in this building. And then we'll pick it up when we get in Monday morning. So they get there Monday morning and there's no poo. And they're like, what WTF, man? Like, you didn't give us our shit.
Oh, no.
Literally. So they call this person up and they're like, no, I left it. And basically somebody stole it. And the point of the story, the guy was like, you could imagine it was like some cheapo college student walking, because it was just like in the building outside the grad student office or something. And you could imagine somebody like some cheap college student was walking by and was like, ooh, free lunch, thank you very much, grabbed the cooler and ran off with it, we're assuming. And then can you imagine being a fly on the wall when that poor sucker of a human being opened up the cooler and realized it had human poo in it? Like,
yeah, he would just say, oh shit.
Oh shit, that's right. Oh, the poop puns are a flying today.
Right.
So yeah,
right, that's
so
what say.
That's my poop in a cooler story, is that some poor person stole
a great story.
It is.
Some poor person was trying to get lunch and got poop instead.
You know, I mean, like, they stole, right? So we can't even say that poor person because they are a thief. So it kind of, you know, it's like, serves you right also that you literally have a piece of human poo looking you back in the eye, showing you the mistakes you've made in your life. So at least there's that. But yeah, I think getting your friend to put a poo in the cooler and bring it to your house, maybe not the best way to do FMT as of yet. You know, maybe once Amy and I patent the poo vacuum 2.0, you know, maybe once we get that up and running, then perhaps we can advance the technology. But shy of the poo vacuum, I think, try to do it the right way. Try to go have the professionals put poop up your pooper and really try to make sure that you're going to be a worthy recipient for the microbes that you're intending to foster. Because they're kind of like pets. They're like roommates.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And
don't steal things or else you'll get an igloo full of poo.
Exactly. And I can't imagine a better way to wrap up this podcast. Well, everybody, as always, thank you for listening. If you can share this podcast with everybody, friends, family, feed on your news feed, whatever, it will help us reach more people. Obviously, maybe you don't want to share this episode because then you told everybody on your Facebook friends list that you listened to an hour-long discussion about fecal transplant. Maybe pick one of our other episodes and share it with your friends that way. But if you could give us a 5-star review on iTunes or a podcasting app, click like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I would be tickled pink to answer your questions in an upcoming Q&A episode. In the meantime, we will see you on another podcast with probably more poop puns and more crazy stories that I'm sure will be worthy of your time and attention. So, Amy, until next time, 'twas a pleasure. Dear readers, dear viewers, 'twas a pleasure. Over and out.